Everybody, it's Soren Baker here on Unique Access, and today we have the honor and the privilege of being joined by phenomenal producer Butter. Thank you for coming through, sir.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man, this is a long time in the making. As you can see, the man's got so many plaques behind him because he's put in phenomenal work that not only is, in my opinion, excellent, but also has sold a lot of units. So that's a good combination. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So, I want to go through a lot of your career and some of the great music that you've done, and also get a lot about your personal evolution as well with music. So,
Sure.
I first heard of you through Caution. So we'll get to that in a second, but you were born and raised in Pennsylvania, right?
Sure, yeah. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Right.
And Pittsburgh has a lot of other interesting connections to a lot of the West Coast stuff through Mel-Man, through Sam Sneed, etc. So what was it with you in particular that once you moved out west made you fit in, do you think?
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned, the lineage of the Pittsburgh Westside connection, hookup. I went to California initially because of Sam Sneed. Sam was out there at the time working with Death Row and Dre, and I saw him back in Pittsburgh one time over Christmas break, or he was in town for something. I saw him at a club, and he mentioned, "Man, I'd love to have you come out and help me with my record." So I was like, "Sure." And long story short, I hadn't heard nothing for a while. I thought he was just blowing smoke, and he actually hit me at some point. By that time, I was living in Atlanta, but I flew out to California to help Sneed out with his record. It was a bunch of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment, so, that's how I actually got out there because of Sam Sneed. And then I eventually, had Mel brought out.
Right. Okay. So how and why, even long before that, did you find yourself getting into music?
Well, my parents have always been into music. I mean, our house was just full of music consistently all the time, all type of different genres, as well as, my parents had a band that I played the drums for at times, but my mom played bass, my dad plays guitar, and my sisters sing, and just, it was just a musical house. So, I was introduced to music that way. I didn't necessarily get interested into production until after I started DJing, So, at times I played the drums for my parents when they were performing certain places. But once I got into DJing, and going through records and stuff like that, eventually I started getting into the love of production. Like, man, how'd they do that? And this, that, and the other. I had friends in New York that would send me mixtapes, and I was just a huge Marley Marl fan, and he was my first, the first reason I ever thought about, like, oh man, this production thing, I got to try this out, but yeah.
Well, let's get to Marley Marl in a second, but before that, since rap is so synonymous with drums and percussion in particular, and you playing drums, how do you think that helped, inspired, or enabled you to develop as a producer later on?
It's interesting that you said that. I think everything we do lends to other things, and I don't want to jump way ahead, but even in me, being involved in film and television now, it was basically because I was self-taught in digging in records through different genres of records. And, I definitely was not shy to go into foreign records and soundtracks and just all type of just the love of digging. So in saying that to say, in playing drums, it definitely was instrumental in my approach of production because, I would literally, and this is on the grimy hip hop side of it all. I've gotten a little bit lazier nowadays, but, in going forth and doing a beat, whenever I would even do a beat, I literally would not use the same set of drums for anything, and maybe it was just because of the fact that, in knowing how to play drums and knowing that, depending on how you hit the drum, where you hit the drum, the intensity, the velocity, everything can make a different sound or feel. So, I definitely didn't want to be once I got into production, I didn't want to be the stiff drum guy to where everything just sounded exactly the same or had no kind of, bounce or anything to it. So playing drums initially, it definitely helped me, because here's the other thing. And going through samples at the time, there's different ways that you have a thought process of production. And, different people could approach a sample in different ways just because of the way that their ear hits it. And being a drummer prior to, it allowed me to say, okay, I'm gonna play this on 4/4, or I'm gonna do this. Your time signature, it allows your time signature to adapt to whatever you want to do, with the sample that you're working with. So I think that that's definitely one of the things that was a major influence to help, shift from, playing drums live to production for me.
And it makes sense, and that's why I was curious about it, because a lot of rap in general, but especially a lot of your stuff is very drum driven. I would argue. So I was always curious, because I had known that you had played drums before you got big, so I was very intrigued as to how you viewed that. And it is interesting, and something I always, it's funny how you were saying with the drums and how different people, when they hit it a different way, it sounds different in the intensity and the place and all that. And I always think about that too with guitars, for instance. Like one dude holding it can get this sound, and somebody else holding it a different way gets a different sound. Looks like they're doing the same thing, but they're not.
Facts.
And that to me is the beauty of music making, is that it's so different per person.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
So one of the greats is Marley Marl. So what year around did you get infatuated with him? Because he has very different periods in the early stages of his career.
Year wise, I could go more off of his work more so than year wise. So
Okay.
I'm talking about the whole Juice Crew era. The symphony and just stuff like that. Anything that he was doing in relation to the Juice Crew, MC Shan, all of that stuff. I was just like, man, this dude is on one.
Well, did you see the book Going Off the History of Cold Chillin' and the Juice Crew? Do you have that book?
Yeah, I don't own it, but I have seen it. Yeah.
Well, I highly recommend it, because I studied and read about as much as I could of all this stuff, and have got to know some of the Juice Crew members and interview them and everything. And it was just great to read it, because Ben, the author, had interviewed other people related to the label, or that engineers and different stuff. So I learned, some different perspectives on the same story. So it's pretty awesome.
So
I think you would like it.
Yeah, I definitely got to check that out, because I could say hands down, he was definitely one of the major influences that made me want to shift from, DJing to production. Even his quirky scratching style, you know what I mean? It was just like, some people would hate on it and like, but I was like, man, I love this. Just the whole combination. It was just, I loved it.
And I think Larry Smith to me is maybe the first super producer, if you want to say Larry Smith or Rick Rubin, probably before Marley, but then Marley, the guy that did it with the widest range of artists for that period at the time before we get to the Dr. Dre's of the world.
Yeah.
And I just thought that Marley's ability to bring the best out of the Roxanne Shantays, the MC Shans, the Master Aces, the Big Daddy Kane's, Cool G Raps, etc. It was Craig G. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
So sonically, what did he do that was so appealing to you?
It was the simple things, like specifically the simple things, like for instance, he was using, you know, kids nowadays may think that to a certain extent 808s and those sounds are brand new, and like, you know, like we didn't utilize them even before my generation, you know. But saying that to say, far as Marley, it was the simple things like hitting the 808 off beat, you know, like and thinking about Nobody Beats the Biz, and you know, hitting the 808 like a off, like it wasn't on the one. It was just quirky, but it was dope. I was like, man, I love that. You know what I mean? As well as like I was saying before, you know, um, interjecting scratches and cuts in there that wasn't like, you know, super professional, but it was like it just felt good. You know, only thing I could really equate it to also is, you know, and this is one thing that I learned in doing production, and definitely shifting from you know, music production to like film and television, is the fact that wherever we may lack in production in some kind of way, that could actually be the door that separates you from everybody else that's trying to go for the same goal that you're going for. So what I mean by that is like, and I'll use myself for instance, you know, anywhere I may lack as a keyboard player, because I hear things before I even do it, and I know how to articulate my thoughts, it might not be right in theory, but it makes sense in how it feels. You feel what I'm saying? So I think that's a beautiful gift in itself. And I think Marley, you know, he definitely was working in that, in my opinion, even though a lot of stuff was sample based, but even the choice of how to use samples and, you know, and stuff like that, I think that's what set him apart. It just wasn't, you know, clinical, if that makes any sense, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing, given that my introduction to you was Caution, that the beats that you did on their album sound nothing like a Marley Marl beat. So how did your evolution go, in the sense that, did you start off trying to mimic Marley Marl? Did you try to just do your own thing first off? Like, how did that work?
That's funny that you said that. I'm saying that to say, because, you know, a lot of times you know how you hear people talk about someone that influenced them, say it's a singer, and they say, man, I love Michael Jackson. He's my everything. Like, he influenced me, this, that, and the other. And they carry none of the Michael Jackson gene at all. You know, if anything, it's a point or a moonwalk or something that they do that you know, the depth of Michael Jackson was just so much greater, you know?
Right,
So,
right.
so in saying that to say, in relation to Marley, early on, maybe, definitely you know, as far as the drum things, I might have, you know, kind of tampered with some of that stuff. But, you know, when I first started doing production, it's not like I didn't have a SP1200. I didn't have, you know, the equipment I had was, man, I was working with like a RX-7 drum machine and like a little Radio Shack sampler that I would speed sample stuff. So, you know, I didn't have the capability to kind of match what he was doing. But as far as drums and stuff like that, I would choose that. And then, you know, in learning the whole digging process, if I found out, you know, and this was before you could just look on the internet and find where stuff was from. You know, you're getting records from different places, and you go through records and you happen to hear, oh, snap, that's where he got the, oh, man. And then you start digging and going back and, you know, looking for other records that had that. And, you know, if anything, it was inspiring to, you know, see where he where he found his, this is a good way to put it, to see where he found his treasures and then go dig in that same place to find different treasures and then make them my own.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Because the interesting thing is, as using Caution for me is the starting point with Central Los Angeles and Lynch Mob Records when Ice Cube was going independent through Navarre. The Land of the Scanless song that you did on that album, you know, was sample driven and stuff, which, you know, is obviously a theme of a lot of rap, but then, you know, you also got away from that at times later. So for you working on getting that shot to work with Caution, what was it about them that made you, you know, land a couple tracks on that album, would you say?
Well, I was fortunate to get the shot in general. I think, and I don't know if this is the total story of it all, but, you know, in going out there to help Sam, you know, his heart wanted to help anybody who was involved with what he was doing. And if we're out there, you know, he wanted to, you know, I'm sure that there were opportunities for him to do some production on some other stuff. And because of his situation, he couldn't. You feel me? Okay. So in him not being able to capitalize on certain things, he may have did the Magic Johnson pass to me in order for me to capitalize on something. So, you know, it was through him. He happened to see them at a mall or something, and, you know, which, you know, it started the whole avalanche in relation to my relationship even with Cube through that. You know, I think excellence begets excellence. So just in moving forth in excellence and just doing the best at what you do. And I'm thankful I was able to get three cuts on there. You know, I like their energy. You know, I heard a couple things prior to, and they was just, you know, they were dope. You know, Gonzo, Sale, all of them, they was just dope when I heard them. So in shooting them some, and I'm also an advocate on, you know, if you're trying to approach anything, I like to undercommit and over deliver.
That's so policy.
So in saying that, not to say that you don't work hard, you know, but, you know, just keep shooting your shot in relation to what production and stuff. I just was shooting them production, and the more that you're able to shoot somebody production wise, you know, the greater chances you have to get on the project. And so in doing so, I ended up with 3 on there, and I'm happy with the 3 because I feel that all 3 were, you know, different in their own right, and it brought a different kind of energy than the rest of the record.
In the sense of my favorites, probably Land of the Scanless that you did. And that record in particular, I liked in the sense that this was, in 95, we had a lot of everybody being the tough guy. Gangster rap was dominant and prominent at that point. And obviously Cube had delivered some of the best music in rap history at that point. But there wasn't as much of, in 95, since we had so much gangster rap that had come out, there wasn't as much of the angle they took on that song, where it was kind of like they were poor, they were trying to make things happen, they were getting called out, the money was on short, you know, you know, it was a rough thing. And shout out to Gonzo, who I know pretty well, is, you know,
Gonzo.
Shout out Gonzo. But with that, lyrically, do you remember working with them on the production side, or them talking to you about the lyrics in particular for that track and what it meant to them?
Not really, only because, you know, that was early in the production stage. And quite honestly, you know, in shooting them beats, and this is a funny story. This is funny, but I'll never forget it. In shooting them beats, you know, I was shooting them beats, didn't hear nothing for a while, and then at some point, Sneed mentioned, "Hey, that group Caution, they want to get 3 joints," and I'm like, "Oh, word!" So I'm like, pumped. I'm in LA, you know, we're like 6 deep in a 2-bedroom, you know, cats going out to strip clubs. I'm on the floor with my drum machine, like, no, I'm gonna just stay here. You know, if I'm in California, I gotta make this thing happen. And not even for the chip wise, it was more so for the love. You know what I mean? I just love to do music, you know, and it blew my mind that, you know, somebody professionally thought enough of what I did and what I had on a little zip drive that I don't even didn't understand how what I did was even saved on it. Actually wanted to purchase something off of a drive like that. So in saying that to say, you know, I just felt fortunate in being able to get on the project. So I didn't, you know, I didn't get the opportunity until, I'm trying to think what song it was. I was in there with one of the songs during recording, but I didn't get a chance to, being early in the production game as a producer, I didn't get a chance to just be in there the whole time, calling shots and stuff like that. So, you know, it was more so on the beat side, you know, me getting my feet wet on the beat side and you know, getting into production that way versus me kind of like, oh man, I think you should do the hook like this, that, and the other. You know, and Cube is a visionary, man, you know, so I don't know how much he lent to it. Shout out to Cube. But, you know, he's always been a storyteller and very vivid. And, you know, so I don't know what he had lent to the initial ideas of it or if it was just all them. But the combination of what they chose and what they put on top of it, I think it was phenomenal. You know, and speaking about Land of the Scandalous, that was like pre-Westside Connection. Like that was like, you know, that was kind of the mold that was about to you know, start into that whole genre, you know.
Well, he says on that album, I am the Westside Connection or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you know, the other, speaking of Westside Connection, which we'll get to now or in a second, but with Super Sperm having K-Dee on there, and he's also on some of the stuff you did with Westside Connection. I always and he was also on Lynch Mob, like Caution was. But I always really liked K-Dee, man. He brought a lot of he brought that kind of savage comedy to the game.
Yeah, it just brought a different energy, like you said. I think with anything and what we miss in music, I think what we feel we miss at times is the combination of the best doing what they do collectively, coming together and just making something incredible. You know what I mean? You think about Earth, Wind, and Fire or any groups that was a certain way, and you know, people may try to duplicate it or do certain things like it, and it's nothing quite like it. It's because, you know, you have to bring the best of each element together in order to come through with something that's just going to be incredible. You know, and I believe that he brought that kind of thing to it, and everybody that contributed, you know, in any of those records that was different than what the status quo was, I think it brought something new and fresh, you know.
Yeah, and I think that back to the earlier Ruthless stuff, that to me is what made Eazy-E so special, and even Cube at times with I Ain't the One, for instance, like taking a harsh topic and harsh language, but injecting humor into it so it's not, you know, it's just funnier than just being outright disrespectful. At least there's the comedic element to it if you choose to look at it that way.
Yeah, yeah. I actually miss that, man, even in thinking about that. Some records I used to like from back in the day too, that, you know, only person that came, well, that I can remember that came close to some stuff was Weird Al. And I'm not using Weird Al as an example of where I'm going, but like there's a lot of things that, you know, kind of hid under the radar, but I still remember, like Bobby, Jimmy, and stuff like that. The stuff that Dre did, and that stuff was like incredible, and it just flew under the radar. Not to say it wasn't known, but like, man, that stuff should still be going on today. You know, who's the ones that's carrying that torch? Because that's a whole nother avenue.
Well, speaking back to Marley Marl, Biz Markie had the Pickin' Boogers, which I always thought was hilarious.
Facts. Yeah.
And you know, I think he got away from it a little bit, but Ludacris was kind of the last great artist I think that did that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The transparency of it all and being
Yeah,
funny and saying
yeah,
certain things.
he had a lot of humor in a lot of what he did, and then his videos were so wild, so just
Yeah.
added a different element. But um, for you now getting into like '96 era, what did you before we get to working on the Aftermath compilation and working on Bow Down? Just getting in the game a little bit, like what did you learn immediately, or some of the early lessons before we get to Bow Down and the Aftermath?
Okay. I think my biggest takeaway with any of that stuff, and it lends into something that we talked about earlier briefly. I think when we have limitations, it causes us to be, when we have limitations, it causes us to be more creative in some ways. I could think about at this point, having everything at my fingertips. It's something different with not having everything at your fingertips that just makes things how they are. For somebody to, I always say that, I was literally self-trained in hip hop and sampling. My father, he, in our basement, he had a Fender Rhodes and a Wurlitzer and stuff like that. I didn't even touch them. And at the same time, I'm like looking through records, trying to find Fender Rhodes samples. And we had that in the basement, So in saying that to say, it's just at this point, in having everything at your fingertips versus not being able to have that access. When I think about those records, I think about how it was from conception to fruition. So the conception may have been the sample, and I built around the sample and put drums and all this other stuff. But because at some point I didn't have any keyboards and stuff, I would have to sample a moved bass sound into a SP1200 and play the bass on the pads, which was kind of unheard of back then. And even, thinking about some of that stuff, the high-pitched synth sounds, all of that stuff I was doing on the SP1200. And, and if we had a chance to even listen through that stuff, I could literally break down why certain things are doing what they're doing, and it's unethical, and it doesn't necessarily it seems like it's kind of effortless, or it does a certain thing. You're like, man, how'd they do that? It's because of the fact of how it was being done. It's like somebody walking with two left shoes and you wonder why they have a certain bop. It's like, it's not just because they're so cool, they're walking with two left shoes, And so the whole perception of how something comes across from the fruition of it all is the fact that, especially with that production, I think about, all I had at that point, it was the SP1200 records, and then a couple little samples that I would interject synth-wise to make melodies around what was there. It wasn't until later, until I was able to incorporate live musicians and stuff like that in there. So I was just going strictly with feeling, and sometimes feeling will beat out theory.
Most of the time, I would say, or a lot of it, at least a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would say that too. I'm just being humble to all of the players right now.
Yeah, but I think the thing is that when when you do something a lot, or Malcolm Gladwell would say, you put in your 10,000 hours, then your intuition comes with all that additional education you then have. So it's
It all comes together.
Yeah, you can incorporate it in a different way because now you're a master, and that's something that I would argue you've achieved, and that's why I think that's how you are able to evolve and develop and adapt and do all these different things than sticking to doing, super hardcore gangster rap. So, at least to me. So.
I agree with you. I definitely agree.
So in '96, with the Aftermath and Bow Down, were you doing that stuff at the same time, or you did some one project before the other? How did that work?
Yeah. Actually, the West Side Connection stuff came first.
Okay.
You know, and I always say it like this. I believe that the Aftermath years and being signed there as an artist and producer, that was like my college years. You know, I could take nothing back from it. You know, big up Dr. Dre. But I could take nothing back from that. And saying that to say, West Side Connection came first. Um, that record was done. It was out. You know, Aftermath came after that in relation to the structure of the deal, you know, and even being a producer there. So long story short, you know, in being signed exclusively at Aftermath, and then at some point Westside Connection starts blowing. Business wise, I had no idea what, you know, somebody else might have been like, man, I just did such and such, and they just keep rolling with that and keep going. Whereas I was like, okay, no, I'm here with the doctor. Like we you know, and you know, what he would definitely tell me, and his career proved it in relation to being exclusive and not selling yourself out all over the place, and you know, building with your team and stuff like that. I believed in that, you know, and that's why I was there, and that's why I ended up signing. And you know, in spite of what Westside Connection was doing at the time, you know, I felt that this is where I was supposed to be, you know. So to answer your question, I know that was long, but to answer your question, yeah, Westside Connection, that came out and, you know, was hitting the charts and went platinum and all type of stuff while I was signed to Aftermath. You know, I signed to Aftermath afterwards.
All right. Well, then let's get into Bow Down, the album. So of course you did the title track, and with that, the thing that I thought was interesting was that the perspectives they took. So at this point now, you're, I would imagine, much more in the studio. Is that true?
A little bit more. Yeah. With Cube, it was we was building a relationship more so, and he was kind of taking me under his wing a little bit to even just show me how certain things went down. Because prior to, I was just doing beats, you know. So, you know, once he started, you know, I started sending him beats, or, you know, taking him beats, and he was picking things, and the numbers started to grow in relation to how many joints we would do together. Then he start like, come over to the crib, because at this point he had a studio in the back of his crib, you know, and I get to see Keston, his engineer he had at the time, how he was, you know, putting stuff to tape, and, you know, I was learning in those kind of aspects. And then every now and then, occasionally, maybe being able to sit in on a vocal session, but it was definitely not a whole bunch of direction far as what was going to happen. Like, no, this is the way you're going to do it. No, do that line again. That definitely didn't happen until way later in our relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay. Well, the thing that I thought was interesting about what you did do on Bow Down, or the beats they picked and then the angles they took, was that they're very, very different. Like, Bow Down is, you know, the chest thumping, announcing what Westside Connection is, as a, even though they had songs before, this was the first for the album. But then, like, do like Criminals was like, whoa, that's kind of a different one. And then on the Super Gangbanging side, we'll cross them out and put a K. So with those three in particular, what did you learn about the sonic range that you had, but then also how artists would look at what you did and be able to do such dramatically different themes?
At that point, I think, you know, once he started picking certain things, it's like you realize what the pocket is. You realize, you kind of get a feel and flow for not specifically what he may have wanted, but I kind of knew at that point like a range of where we could kind of go. And I also knew that, you know, he wasn't limited in how far we could go left. You know what I mean? So in saying that to say and thinking about Bow Down and incorporating, you know, what would be West Coast drums mixed with like some a 1-2 boom bap. I was always an advocate for mixing genres, you know, for having something that has the elements of something hard that was West Coast and funk, but also having hip hop elements to it, you know, or in saying that to say, going back to drumming, live drumming, you know, mixing something that has a 16th triplet drum feel to it over something that was just gangster and hard, you know, sample wise and keyboard wise. So, you know, once I knew that, you know, sky was the limit on direction of where we could go, it was actually fun being able to, you know, start from the ground up and have drums that just hit hard, that were hip hop, that might have a little grit on them and this, that, and the other, with kind of a swing pattern to them, but not too happy and swingy, but have a swing pattern with the melodic sample over top of that, placed with the sprinkle of moog sounds. It was just like a gumbo of creativity, you know. And I like to say again, once I knew that we could experiment in these areas, and this is things that he definitely liked, and when he would run it past Dub and Mac, they would like it, then it was like, okay, let's run. You know, let's run with it. So that, it was just fun. That creative process was fun. You know, during that time, that's all I was doing beat. I was sending, I don't know how many beats I might have sent Cube in order to get 7 on that record, but it was a grip.
With Cross the Mountain Put a K, that was, I would say, one of the most lyrically abrasive songs on there, as far as naming names and going after people and really dissing stuff. So for you as a producer that I imagine didn't have anything to do with that, what they were talking about, how did that make you feel, or did you react, or did you care, or how was that for you?
At the time, I was just excited, man. It came out, and, you know, I think, you know, and my son, he's into production and stuff now. He's already exceeded where I ever was at his age and beyond, because he plays and everything. But in saying that to say, and talking to the young generation, and just, and me in hindsight thinking about myself, there's something that comes with the whole process of production that unless you go through the whole process, you'll never know the beauty of the whole thing, you know? So, you know, I had a certain feeling that I felt as I was creating the beats, you know, in a hotel room, drinking Strawberry Quick and smoking cigarettes. And it was a whole nother feeling to where once you hear vocals on there over something that was just an instrumental, that brings a whole new light to it. And then there's a whole nother process in which you add other little elements to go around that, which is just beautiful. And then there's a whole nother element in which it gets mixed, you know. So all of those different things, you know, to answer the short and sweet of it all, when I heard it come out, it was like I wasn't involved. It felt like I wasn't involved, and that's always the best thing. Even in relation to beats and music I may do at this point, I'll put something, I won't listen to something for a long time, you know, so that when I go back to it, it's either going to give me the chills, I'm gonna get goosebumps from it and be able to rock with it, like, okay, yeah, this is fire. Or, you know, I may be creatively, it may give me other ideas to go further with it, or it's a thing that I just scrap, like, oh yeah, that's not gonna work. So, you know, to answer the question again, I was excited when it came out, you know, and, you know, in relation to, I didn't know the effect it would have, you know, on the country in general and on the whole, the East Coast, West Coast thing, because, you know, it was early stages in that. It wasn't even where it was, you know. And I didn't know the impact it was going to make, and I didn't know I definitely was not in tune to exactly, you know, I heard what was there. I heard the lyrics. I thought it was good. It gave me goosebumps, and that's kind of where I was at that season in my life, you know.
Gotcha. Yeah, because to me, it's a very powerful record in the sense as the whole album, in the sense that it really let people know, like, hey, the West Coast, as dominant and prominent as it is also not gonna back down if you guys keep doing all this dissing us. And that I thought that was great.
You know what though, and I guess I could. What's interesting, and I just thought about it, and it's a parallel between the two, you know, and from what I'd seen in the interview, Cube talking about, you know, the conception of was it America's Most Wanted?
That had an anniversary recently, so it might have been.
Yeah. And what was interesting, you know, you never know the backstory of certain things. And, you know, I used to love Bomb Squad, Hank Shockley and them, as well as, you know, producers, you know, later on once they start doing what they was doing. But saying that to say, you know, he had mentioned that, you know, people was talking stuff on him about, you know, he's going to New York for production and this, that, and the other, and, you know, trying to get at him. So, you know, initially they was just going to do a song or so, and I'm paraphrasing this, but, you know, they was going to do a song or so. But once they heard that, they was like, oh man, we gonna do this whole joint. So in saying that to say, in relation to, you know, Westside Connection, you know, it's almost like it was and I'm not saying this in a cocky way at all. It's almost like, you know, no one necessarily knew what to expect with Westside Connection, but I think that, you know, Cube knew that he had like a secret weapon in relation to something that was gonna to be able to marry a lot of things together, especially production-wise. The lyrics, you know, where they went with the lyrics, that hit a whole nother chord. But in relation to production-wise, you know, being able to have, you know, drums sound a certain way over top of things that still made sense with what was happening on the West Coast, along with other elements. I think that's what caught everything, you know, in the whirlwind that it ended up being in, you know.
Yeah, and then I also always had liked the Cross Mountain Put a K, where they had the play off the My Philosophy from Boogie Down Productions with the 4 seconds the teacher's about to begin to speak.
Yeah.
So what, if any, role did you play in that, or was that all them?
As far as the lyric wise, it was all of them, and putting, you know, other little elements in there. That was definitely them. Like I said, Cube's a visionary. All of them are visionaries. You know what I mean? Very, you know, knowing exactly how they want to go into certain things and being able to articulate it. And the gift is, or the goal is, once they have an idea and they want it articulated, as a producer, being able to pull it off. You know what I mean? Being able to, you know, and that lends into other things. As much as we train ourselves in certain things, we think it's for one thing, but it trains us for something else. So, you know, if somebody says they want something to feel a certain way, my job is to go say, okay, commit, and then go above and beyond me saying, okay, you know? So I think that, I definitely think that happened with that record in general. And the elements that they put into it in relation to lyrics, I know it was all purposeful in relation to what they did. You know, and being hip hop fans on top of it, and then feeling like certain hip hop is slapping you in the face, it's like, no, I'm gonna utilize every piece of hip hop to then come back at you. And that's how that record was in general.
Yeah, absolutely. They did a good job.
Yeah.
And it's still, you know, still a very respected and important album. So then, how did what you had been doing at that point with Caution and then Westside Connection in particular set you up to get you in the door to get with Dre and to become on staff at Aftermath?
Well, during that time, we had some neighbors that was, oh, this is after. Well, how I got introduced to Dre, well, Sam Sneed introduced me to Dr. Dre. And because of their relationship and working relationship and everything, you know, I was introduced to Dre, and I was able to be involved with functions, so cookouts and stuff like that, or occasionally pop up at the studio. But it was like I was one of the homies, really, because Dre, and I don't know if it's either a respect that Dre had for Sam, or if it was Sam not necessarily mentioning certain things, but Dre never approached me about production at all. It's like I'm just one of the homies. You know, I'm one of Sneed's homeboys that's just out here and, hey, what's up, man? And it was all good. How I got my introduction to Dre in relation to production was from a neighbor we had, Jay Flex. Flex, you know, he'd always come upstairs, play me some beats, bud. I'm playing them beats. I give him some beats on a CD or tape or whatever it was. And he would always, at that time, he was writing everything for Dre, you know, heads ringing. He was writing a bunch of stuff. So, and saying that to say, he would go to Dre's house, and, you know, if Dre didn't have something on hand just for him to write to, he'd just be writing to my beats. So at one point, you know, he was down there, he was writing to a beat I had, and Dre came downstairs to get ready to start working. He was like, what's that? He asked him what it was. He's like, oh, this is Butter. He's like, who? This, that, and the other. So that's how that, you know, whole thing ended up even coming about through Jay Flex. And the beat specifically that he actually mentioned something about was a beat that we used for the beginning of California Love video. That, you know, when before they was going in the tent, there was like a beat playing in the back with piano and some drums and stuff. Excuse me. That was the actual beat that Dre heard. So, you know, through Jay Flex was how I met Dre production wise. And then, you know, there was a time span that went beyond that. And then, you know, once he transitioned from, you know, Death Row to starting his own company, then I was approached to see, you know, if I wanted to be involved or not. You know, so maybe it was just a conflict of interest. Like he didn't want to pull me into what he was about to, you know, leave from.
Right. And then when, you know, I've had the fortune of being in the studio with Dre a few times over the years, and actually while he's making music, and it's definitely a very different experience than a lot of other producers I've been around. So for you going in and your first kind of exposure of actually seeing him really work, what was the difference from the other things that you had been around to that point?
Like I said, I believe those were like my college years, you know. And what I did learn from that was definitely musicianship, utilizing live musicians and incorporating them with what ideas you may have. Or, and like I said, you learn things in one season and don't know how and when you're going to use them someplace else. Another thing that was instrumental in what I do now definitely is just that whole season, utilizing musicians and replaying certain things, or, you know, having an idea that initiated from one place, but then altering it to make it your own, to where it's no longer that, but it has the same feeling. You understand what I'm saying? So, you know, being able to capture a feeling and emote those feelings through. I know one thing he said that I'll never forget, and I think about it constantly. And you know, that's the time of 2-inch tape. You know, it wasn't all the digital stuff, and so this analogy comes from that era, but we can incorporate it with anything that we do at this point. And he was like, he said, "But man, the hardest thing is to get what's in here on tape. You know, we got so many ideas in our head that are incredible. That's like world changing. Like, you know, but if we can't articulate our ideas and get them on the tape, it's for naught. You know, so I learned a lot through that season of being able to see how things start and the whole process of it all and how it grows, and you know, and how each part of the process, you can't take away each part of the process because it definitely means something. You know, there's times that where guys would come in the studio to record over something, and you know, it would sound good, but if it wasn't good in DR's mind, if it didn't articulate the right way, they might leave feeling like, man, I'm gonna be on this record, but you know, it didn't make the cut. You know, so being able to articulate what's in your head and getting it on tape, being able to utilize musicians to bring out, you know, to bring out the best in something, or being able to articulate what you can to the point you can, and then direct someone to bring it, you know, to a better place musicianship wise, utilizing live musicians and strings and all type of stuff like that. You know, it was a great time because it was, you know, in relation to thinking about resources. Um, it was limitless. So, you know, if you have unlimited resources to be able to try to articulate what's on your mind, and you have the time to do it, you know, you have carved out time to just do that, there's no way that you won't grow from it. So, you know, I learned so much. I learned, you know, the SSL board, from sitting at the SSL board for, you know, hours and hours and hours and hours constantly, from not knowing what it was to understanding that one channel strip is the same throughout the whole thing, but it's just in one, you know, in multiple pieces, to learning how to mix. And, you know, and I utilize all those things now. You know, I learned so much, you know, as much as I thought I knew. It was like, it was able to, like you said, one thing goes on top of each other, and it just helps everything to grow just that much more.